So welcome everyone on this channel named Geeks for Geeks School, and today we are here to learn how can we design this beautiful calculator using HTML CSS. And we are also going to learn in this tutorial how, with the help of simple JavaScript coding, we can make this calculator work the way I am going to show it to you now. So if suppose you want to calculate the sum of 2 or 3 different numbers, you just have to write down the whole thing over here like this. Fine, and when you will hit this equal to button, so this is what is going to happen. So there is a function named eval, there is a function with name eval in JavaScript, which we can make use of for making different kind of mathematical calculation. Fine, so that is what I have applied on this calculator to perform the required things. Suppose you want to divide this number over here by 32. So you just have to write down the whole thing like this, and when you will hit this equal to button, this is what this calculator is going to give to you as a result. So now if you want to eliminate everything which is getting reflected inside this input box, you just have to hit the C button and everything is going to go disappear. Fine, so that's how this calculator works. Let's now dive into the code.org platform and access Weblab environment and check out how can we design, what are the different HTML codes and CSS codes we require for designing this beautiful calculator. So this is the code.org platform, and here we are going to access the Weblab. For accessing the Weblab, we just have to hit this create button, and automatically a cascading menu like this appears. We can come down over here and hit this view all projects option. So this is going to redirect us on one of the beautiful pages on code.org. When we'll come down and hit this view full list option, this is where you will find this Weblab option. Okay. Here's how the environment looks like. So it is divided into 3 different parts, as you very well know about it. In this first part, we are able to see all the documents. The first one is this HTML document, and the second one is this CSS document where you can add some CSS code. Then there is a workspace where you can enter the coding part, and then there is a stage area where you get to see the result of the code you define over here in this workspace. Fine, now let's go back on that original calculator. So this is what we are going to design now. Now the first thing which is coming right on the top of this calculator is this company's name, Geeks for Geeks calculator. So for getting that top title, we guys can make use of this division section, and let's have a class for this division section with name title. Fine, now inside this we're going to have Geeks for Geeks calculator. Okay, and then we can close the division section. Okay, so now as you can see, the Geeks for Geeks calculator is getting reflected over here on the stage area. Okay, so now for these buttons and this input box, we are going to define a table, and then we will define the required HTML code for getting all these buttons inside this table. Let's do that. So we are going to make use of this table named tag. Okay, and as you can see, we have a border also for this table. So for defining a border for the table, we can make use of this attribute named table, and let's have the size of 1 pixel. Fine, I think this is going to give us the desired output, and we can close the table at this point, because it is a container element, so we need to define the end point also for this table named tag. Okay, now inside this table name tag we are going to put everything inside this t-body component. Fine, and I am closing it over here. Okay, so there are some rows which we are able to see over here inside this table. In this first row we have one input box and this button C. Then in this second row we have this button 1, 2, these 3 buttons 1, 2, 3 and one hash. Okay, then in this third row we have again 4 buttons. Then in fourth row also we have 4 different buttons, and in this fifth row also we have 4 different buttons. So it means that we have 4 different rows. We need to define 4 different columns, for this particular table. And there are, how many rows are there? There are 4 rows, there are 5 rows and 4 columns, right? Let's define the required code for the first row. So we are going to make use of this tr. Just a second. Okay, so I'm going to make use of this tr tag. Tr is for table row, remember this thing, and because it is a container tag, so we need to define the end tag also for this table row. Now inside this first row we are going to define the code, the required HTML code for this input, for getting this input box and getting this button on which the C is getting reflected over here on the stage area. So for defining the components of a row, or you can say for defining columns of a particular row in a table, we need these tags, TD tags. TD stands for table data. Okay, they create rows inside a row of a table. Now because this input box is covering this entire space, so it is covering the space of 3 columns, right? So what we can do, we can make use of this call span property, which is used for creating columns, right? So I would like the input box to take this much of space. Okay, the space of input box is equal to the space of 3 columns, right? If we'll compare this first row with the second or third or fourth or fifth row, you will be able to identify it very easily. So it is taking exactly taking the size of 3 different rows. So that is the reason I've defined 3 over here for this call span attribute. And now inside this we can make use of this input tag for getting a text type of input box. Okay, and let's define an ID. Let's define an ID also for this input box. So I'm going to have an ID with name result. Okay, so we are done with defining the required code for getting the input box. Why isn't... Let's now end this table data. Okay, so as you can see, this input box is now getting reflected over here on the stage area. Now what else do we have in this first column? In this first row we have a button also, on the top of which the C is getting reflected. Now how can we get this button on the stage area? So for getting the button, we can make use of, just a second, let me just refresh this window once. For renaming your project, you can make use of this top section. just hit the rename button and automatically you will be able to now rename the project. So I am making a calculator today. Saving it. Let's refresh this window because it's a bit slow. It's working a bit slow. That's the reason. Refresh the window. I think now I will be able to. Yep. So the second thing we need to define the code for is this button, C button. First of all, we need to create a column for that button. So this TD is going to help us in doing the same, and then we can make use of this input tag, and for this type section I need a button. So that is the reason passing this button as a value for this type attribute. Okay, now I would like to see C right on the top head of the button. So that is the reason passing this C as a value for this value attribute. And if the user will click this button, let's add some function also to this button. So on click is an attribute with which you can add some function to any button you have defined in the HTML coding. So let's define a function with name CLR. Okay, so when the user will hit the C button, this is a function which will be called up, and here we can end the TD tag. Okay, so now this C is also visible to us over here. Fine. So we are done with defining the required code for this very first row. In this very first row we have this input box and this button C. Right, now let's define the code for the next row. So we have 4 different buttons in this next row. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a row first for this. So tr tag we guys can make use of for creating the second row. Now inside this tr tag we are going to define the code for getting 4 different buttons, like the way we are able to see over here on this calculator. So TD is going to help us in doing the same. TD. So this will create the first column, and input I am making use of. Let's do one thing. Let's copy this whole thing. Okay, and I am going to place it over here like this, and then we guys can close the TD tag. Let's make the required changes in this code. So type is going to remain button only. Value that I would like to see on this button is 1. Okay, and what else do we need to do? We need to change the name of the function. So let's do one thing. Let's make use of this function with name this1. Fine, and let's place this in between single inverted commas. Okay, so when the user will hit this one named button, automatically this function is going to get called up. Fine, let's now copy this whole thing and paste it over here and make the required changes. So now we need to change this one to 2. Then here we need to change 1 to 2 again, and as you can see the second button is also visible to us on the stage area. Let's repeat the same step and create 2 more buttons. Sorry. So this is going to be 3. This is a function which will be called up, and this is 4. This is for 4. Okay, now this is for hash, right? We need to change it to slash. Okay, and this one also we need to change to slash. Okay, now all the 4 required buttons are visible to us over here in this beautiful table, right? Okay, is there anything else I need to define for this? Great. Now let's do one thing. Let's copy this entire code which we have defined for the second row, and I am going to make use of this code for creating these 3 different rows. So this is going to be the second row. Now what are the different things we have in the second row? So we have again 4 buttons, and then we have a button for 4, then 5, then 6, and then minus. Let's make the required changes over here. So 4, here also we need to write down 4, then here we need to change it to 5, then 5, then after that it is 6, and then it is minus, and here also we need to change it to minus. As you can see, all the 4 required buttons are visible to us over here on the stage area. Let's now repeat the same steps for creating the 4th row. So what do we have in this 4th row? 7, 8, 9, and this plus button. So 7, and then it is 8, then this one is 9, and this we need to change it to plus. Okay, now we can repeat the same steps for creating the 5th row as well. So we have dot 0 equal to an asterisk in the 5th row, changing it to dot, then it is 0 equal to asterisk, 0, 0, then it is equal to, and then it is asterisk. Okay, so we are almost done with defining the required HTML code for all the elements we need for our calculator. Fine. Do we have to make any changes over here? Okay, so this is what will be called when I will hit this dot, and this is a function which will be called when the user will hit this 0. And then for this equal to, let's do one thing. Let's change the name of this function for this equal to operator, because this is the one which is going to give us the result, right? So let's do one thing. Let's change it to something like solve. So this is a function which will be called up when the user will hit this equal to sign or equal to button. Okay, and then I think rest everything is perfectly fine. Let's now customize the appearance of this calculator. For doing that, we are going to make use of style sheet, eliminating everything whatever is there by default on this document. The first thing that we need to do is we need to style this GeeksforGeeks calculator title. So we have made use of this class. We have defined this class title for this division section. Let's make use of this class for accessing the component we have inside the class. So margin bottom, I would like to see a gap of 10 pixels. Okay, so as you can see, now there is a gap in between this GeeksforGeeks calculator and this table over here, which actually contains all the buttons, right? And text align, I would like everything to get aligned in the center, passing this text align is center. And for the width, let's make use of 210 pixels. I think this will be fine. Then what kind of color I would like to see it in? So I would like to see it in green color. And then we can define a border also of let's have a solid border of black color and of 2 pixels. Let's see what are we going to get when we will refresh the stage area. So now this is how this Geeks for Geeks calculator title is going to appear on the stage area. Fine, so it is very much identical to the way this one is appearing on the top of this calculator. So it is perfectly fine right now. Okay, let's now access the input components, the type of which is button. So that's how we can do it. And see, the background color of these buttons is green, right? So for making the required changes for the background color, there is a property named background color we can make use of. And then let's pass this green value. As you can see, now the background color of all the buttons have changed from gray to green, right? Okay, let's now define the color for the text which is getting reflected on these buttons. So I would like to have white color for the texts which are getting reflected on these buttons. We are able to see the changes over here. Now we are going to have a solid border for these buttons. Let's have a solid black border of 2 pixels. Okay, so now the border is also visible to us over here for these buttons. And what is the width? I would like to see them covering the entire 100% width. Now this is what our calculator is looking like. So it is perfectly fine. Okay, now let's customize the appearance of this input box, the type of which is text. So we can copy this whole thing from here and place it over here, and let's replace it with text. Inside this inside these curly brackets, we are now going to define the code with which we can change the appearance of the text. So I would like to see the background color of this input box to change to floral white. I think this is a good option. Yes, it is. Okay, and then we can have a border for this input box also. So for this border thing, we guys can make use of this line of code we have defined for this input type button over here, and let's paste it over here. Okay, so now our input box has a solid border of black color, and I would like it to cover the entire 100% width. Great. So this is how the calculator is going to look like now. Let's run it on a bigger window. So with the help of this link, when you will open up the calculator on a bigger window, this is what you're going to get as an output. Fine. Now if I'm hitting this 1 or 2 or 3, nothing is happening. Why? Because I haven't defined any JavaScript coding yet for these functions that we have defined for for these buttons over here in this HTML coding. So clear is a function which will be called up when the user will hit this C button, and if the user will hit any of these buttons over here, So these are the functions which will be called up. Fine, so we need to define specific code so that we can make these functions work. Now what is that code? That's what we are going to see. Okay, so for accessing the console panel, in which we can fire the JavaScript coding, we can make use of the shortcut key Control Shift and J. You need to press Control Shift key and J key together. Automatically this console window is going to open up. Now the first thing that we are going to define is a function with name this. Okay, so as you can see over here, we have this function named this for all these buttons 4, 5, 6, minus, and 7, 8, 9. For these buttons we have this function named this. Now inside this we are going to pass a parameter, so it is now a parameterized function. Okay, then we need to come on the second line. Let's make use of these curly brackets for defining the required code for this function. So the first thing that I would like to do is I would like to access this component. Just a second. Okay, I would like to access this input box for which the ID is result. Now how can we make use of this ID for accessing this input box? Using simple JavaScript coding. That's what we are going to check out now. So for accessing the entire document, accessing the entire HTML code of this web page, you can make use of this document named keyword. And now because you want to get the element with the help of an ID, so you can make use of this code get element by ID, and after that you can place the ID of that component you want to access. So I want to access the component having this ID result, right? So this is what is going to help you in accessing that input box over here, the ID of which you have defined in this HTML code over here as result, right? Fine. Now I would like to set the value of this result name component equal to val. Okay, and then we can have these curly brackets. Done with defining the required JavaScript code for this function named this. Okay, now we are going to define the function named solve. You remember we have this function named solve defined over here in this HTML coding for this equal to button. Okay, so whenever the user will hit this equal to button, this is a function which will be called up by our browser. Let's go back on this console panel and define the required code for this function named solve. So let's have a variable with name x. Okay, and I am going to access this result name component. So this is the code which I can make use of over here. And then because we want to access the value of this result name component, so that is the reason using this dot value property. And let's have one more variable inside which I am going to make use of this function named eval. So eval is a function which helps us. It is a JavaScript function with which you can make any kind of mathematical calculation. Now inside this we are going to place this x. Fine. And now whatever expression is going to come over here, automatically it will get saved in this variable x. And finally the value of that expression will be calculated by this eval function, and the result will be stored in this y named variable. Okay, and then we can again access this result named component using the same code, and let's now set the value of this result name component equal to the result, which is going to get saved in this variable named y, right? Okay, so we are good to go now. Let's now end this function. So we are done with defining the required code for this function as well as for this solve function. Now the only thing that we are left with is the code for this clear function. Where is that C button? This is a HTML code that we have defined for the C button over here. Now when the user will hit this C button, what is going to happen? This is a function which will be called up. So we need to now define the JavaScript code for this function, right? Let's go back on this console panel and do the needful. So function CLR. Okay, and after that we need to write down the code in between the curly brackets. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to access this element with ID result. Fine, and as soon as the user will hit that C button, the C button which is getting reflected over here, so automatically whatever the thing will be there inside this result named input box, it will go disappear, and finally nothing will be visible to the user inside the input box. Why? Because we have passed this null value over here for this function clear. Okay, let's now close this curly brackets. Okay, now we are going to see whether we are going to check whether this calculator over here is going to give us the required output or not. So let's hit this one. Okay, why is it not working? Have we missed anything? Let's do one thing. Let's copy this whole thing and I am going to put it inside a notepad file, or yep, because I don't want to lose this JavaScript code I have defined over here. Great, so this is the first function, perfectly fine. Then we have this function named solve. Okay, this is also perfectly fine. And then we have one more function with name clear, right? Okay, so now this code is perfectly fine, so we can directly paste it in the console panel and get the output. But before that we need to see why our calculator is not working. Let's do one thing. Let's make use of this link and access the calculator again. Okay, so we have the calculator right now visible to us over here on this beautiful web page. This is the JavaScript code, and let's hit this one. Okay, so nothing is happening, right? Why is it so? Have we made any mistake over here? Okay, the attribute we have made use of over here for this on click part, it is not correctly spelled by us. It should be on click. Let's copy it and make the required changes wherever it is necessary. I think now we will be able to get the required output. Yeah. let's now fire this entire JavaScript code again over here in this console panel. Okay, so I'm able to now get this value over here. So if I'm hitting this 1, I'm getting 1. If I'm hitting 2, I'm getting 2 over here in this input box. So all the buttons are working perfectly fine. Now why they are getting added like this? Just because I've placed this plus operator over here. So whatever I am going to put, it will be added automatically to the existing value of this input box. Fine. Now if you want to calculate the sum of two different numbers, let's see whether we will be able to do that or not. But first of all, I would like to see whether this C button is working fine or not. So if I will hit the C button, what should happen? This browser will call this clear function, and everything which right now we are able to see in this input box is going to go disappear, just because we have passed this null as a value for this result named field. Let's see whether this button over here is going to give us the required output or not. Yes, everything has got disappeared, and I think this code over here is working fine now. Okay, let's now make use of this expression, okay, and see whether this function which we have defined for this equal to button, is it working fine or not. So what will happen, as soon as I will hit this equal to button, this 12/8 is going to go in this variable x. Okay, and after that, from there this function eval is going to pick up the value of x, and it will calculate this expression for us. Now whatever the result will be, it will be saved in this variable y, and after that the result is going to get reflected in this input box. Let's see whether we will be able to get the required output or not. So I'm hitting this equal to button, and yes, the output is getting reflected in this input box over here. So everything is working perfectly fine. Let's see whether these buttons over here are also going to give us the correct output or not. So I'm hitting the C button, eliminating everything whatever is there in this input box, and let's now calculate the sum of 3-4 different numbers. So these are 4 different numbers, okay, and in between these numbers we have this plus operator, right? Let's set this equal to button and see what's gonna happen. So yes, we are getting the desired output, right? So this calculator is working perfectly fine, okay, and this is the way you guys can develop such applications using basic HTML, CSS and JavaScript coding. Hope you guys enjoyed this lecture a lot. Do like and share this video in your groups and make it reach the maximum students possible. Thank you very much.